The National Interest, 8th of November 2023, Human Rights Transgressor. China is seeking to modify the definition of human rights. China has the worst record regarding human rights, having destroyed the cultures of Xinjiang and the Tibetans and used thought control methods to impose its will on its people. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a stunning declaration in September: "Human rights for all is the shared pursuit of humanity." This may seem like a significant turnabout for China, particularly in light of a recent study demonstrating that the country's state-sponsored forced labor program in the western province of Xinjiang is still in place. Human rights ultimately signify the negative aspects of slavery. The ministry does, however, note that there is no one-size-fits-all model for promoting and protecting human rights in the very next paragraph. Respect should be shown for each nation's autonomous decision to follow its route toward human rights development. According to China, government leaders of a nation should determine what defines human rights, which states that countries should base their decisions on historical background, cultural heritage, social systems, and levels of socio-economic development. Stated differently, governments have the authority to define what is meant by human rights. China's cultural legacy and historical backdrop seem to suggest that forced labor is acceptable there. Vladimir Putin must be relieved by Beijing's new interpretation of human rights, as he can now claim that jailing political opponents is an unquestionable feature of Russia's past. Naturally, torture and execution by the authorities in North Korea, Afghanistan, and Syria would be acceptable to Saudi Arabia, as would the killing of journalists. After all, what horror isn't warranted by its historical context? While most people understand human rights as those inalienable rights that everyone should be granted just for being human, China views human rights as limited to those rights that the government wishes to give its citizens based on those rights that it has historically provided to citizens. It should come as no surprise that human rights mean nothing if leaders of nations can only define them in terms of historical precedent and cultural heritage, exactly what China desires. The Chinese Communist Party frequently uses rhetorical nullification of rights and freedoms, a puzzling assertion for a ministry of an unabashedly authoritarian, one-party country is that, we must safeguard people's democratic rights, as made by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A single ministry is not making these easily refutable assertions. China's State Council Information Office produced a document this month in connection with President Xi Jinping's much-discussed Belt and Road Forum that argued, humanity's shared goals are freedom and democracy. Once again, China's non-democracy is saved by moral relativism. There is no single model of democracy that is universally applicable, far less a superior one, the text continues. Democracy is not Coca-Cola, the syrup is made in a single nation but tastes the same everywhere. Democracy is a practical answer to pressing issues, not a decorative item. Fake democracy includes attempts to control the patent of democracy, define democratic standards arbitrarily, and create a false narrative of democracy versus authoritarianism to incite conflict between political ideas and systems. Admitting that there isn't a single democratic model isn't difficult. For example, the US and the UK have distinct models. It's also acceptable to argue that democracy is not a soft drink like Coca-Cola, democracy is a political system. Nevertheless, it is evident that the primary characteristic of democracy is that citizens choose their leaders from a list of options. This is not the case in China. Local elections are permitted in the PRC, but only to select candidates who have been pre-approved. By any measure, it would be difficult to describe that as democracy or freedom. China's assertions about democracy and human rights are easily disregarded as defensive and hollow propaganda, which is effectively geopolitical gaslighting. Only a few weeks after Saudi Arabia and Iran were added to the BRICS political bloc that China leads with Russia, President Xi Jinping has the astonishing ability to assert that ideological confrontation, geopolitical rivalry, and bloc politics are not a choice for us because of this fixation with gaslighting. It also allows China to claim that it never imposes its will upon other nations, even though it actively uses armed boats to impose its will on the countries bordering the South China Sea. However, the same methodology is applied to other, more complicated problems with natural and detrimental effects on China's global relations. For example, open, equitable, and corrupt-free economic interaction depends on transparency. China maintains that its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is a fair, equitable and transparent system of international trade and investment, even though it heavily relies on opacity and secret transactions in international accords to hide bribery, intimidation, or excessively one-sided provisions. Being open is essential. Lack of transparency has aided China's trillion-dollar endeavor to expand infrastructure and investment throughout the Global South through the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, by encouraging reckless lending, inadequate risk assessment, broken promises, wasteful, unnecessary, and subpar construction, and pervasive corruption. Citizens cannot hold their leaders accountable for problematic transactions through the democratic process if they cannot see debt levels, contractual terms, or repayment circumstances.